Hello, this is Dylan Marino and Team One. Today we're going to be discussing moral cleansing and ethical behavior in business. A brief overview of our presentation. We're going to go over our introduction. We'll discuss our Patagonia case study, our Volkswagen Hard Knocks video case study. We will introduce some evidence around British Petroleum BP and how it ties into both of our other businesses, and then we'll close up with some key takeaways and final thoughts. So first of all, when do ethics actually show up and what are they? Ethics begin in an organization, in a boardroom with leaders, with organizational founders, and they leave that room with a set of principles, values, mission, that they have created in a vacuum. From there, the goal then becomes how do we get our business to act in this way? And so when do ethics actually show up? Ethics show up in the day-to-day execution of tasks, whether that's at a fast food restaurant delivering service, at an education organization helping young students, or any other facet of life. Ethics show up when you are faced with difficult decisions in your daily execution. So what happens when ethics don't hold? Typically, individuals and organizations are going to be hesitant to define themselves as unethical. And so instead, the focus will then become, how can we change this story so that it highlights all of the amazing milestones that we accomplish and minimizes or explains away some of the shortcomings. So we're now going to frame our decision in terms of what needed to get done, what were some of the blockers, and what outcome did we ultimately decide had to happen? What was the key outcome required of our project to reach the end goal, and how can we show that the decisions that we made ultimately led to us and were the only way for us to achieve that required outcome. And that's where we see some moral cleansing start to take shape, when we're seeing how can we trade off this behavior in terms of this goal, or how do we make the ends justify the means. So as we look at these businesses today, what we are evaluating is not just what were their outcomes, did they achieve the goal that they set out to, but when did ethics become part of the decision-making process? What was prioritized whenever the process was put under pressure, and what did the system reinforce?
Patagonia is a strong example of ethical leadership because it has fundamentally restructured how business operates to align with its environmental mission. While it is still a for-profit company, it changed its ownership so that about 98% of its profits are directed to a non-profit organization called the Holdfast Collective, which focuses on funding climate solutions and environmental protection. At the same time, a separate entity known as a Purpose Trust holds the company's voting control, ensuring that all major decisions stay aligned with its mission. What this means is that Patagonia has shifted from a traditional profit-maximizing model to one where profit is used as a tool to serve a broader ethical goal, protecting the planet. So, this is where we can connect Patagonia to the concept of moral cleansing from the Perkins article. Moral cleansing typically refers to situations where individuals or organizations engage in unethical behavior and then attempt to compensate for it afterward, often through donations or positive actions, so to restore their moral image. However, Patagonia does not follow this pattern. It is not reacting to any wrongdoing or trying to fix past harm. Instead, it has embedded ethics directly into its business model from the beginning. So by aligning its financial structure with its environmental purpose, Patagonia reduces the likelihood of ethical trade-offs and avoids the need for moral cleansing altogether. So overall, Patagonia represents a form of proactive ethical leadership. Rather than waiting for ethical issues to arise, the company builds strong North Star values like environmental responsibility into its structure and decision-making processes. This contrasts sharply with companies like Volkswagen, which only responded after unethical behavior was exposed. Patagonia shows that when ethics are built into the system itself, they consistently guide behavior across the organization. So, the key takeaway is that ethical leadership is not just about individual decisions, it's about designing systems and incentives that naturally promote responsible and sustainable outcomes.
Hey everyone, my name is Gage, and I'm going to talk about Volkswagen and the emissions scandal that they went through. So, with the emissions scandal, they did not just make a small mistake, they actually built software into their vehicles that would detect when emissions tests were being ran and modify and alter the engine in order to pass these tests. The main problem is that in real world driving, these engines ended up producing much more pollutants than legally allowed. And at the same time, they were being marketed as environmentally friendly and a clean car. Now, even after all of that, Volkswagen still did not collapse. Yes, they did have to pay billions in fines and they took a huge and massive reputational hit, but they did end up still selling millions of cars worldwide between 2024 and 2025. Even though they have been recovering, sales and profits still have been unstable, especially in big markets like US and China. So even years later, you can still see the effects that this scandal had on the organization. What I find most interesting is how Volkswagen responded to this. They've been really pushing into their EV side of vehicles, and they've actually outperformed sales in Europe compared to Tesla. This shows that they are trying to reposition themselves as more sustainable and regaining their image of sustainable vehicles. But when you compare Volkswagen to Patagonia, it's a completely different mindset. Patagonia did not have to restart from a scandal. From the beginning, they started off being sustainable. Not only that, but Patagonia has been using its profits to help fight climate change and have been very transparent about their impact. So basically, the comparison boils down to values. Volkswagen reacted after getting caught, whereas Patagonia stayed proactive since the start of their company. And this difference is what leads each consumer to trust the companies that they do.
So now that we've talked a little bit about both Patagonia and Volkswagen stories, we wanted to talk about another company who was forced to make an ethical change. So British Petroleum is one of the world's largest energy companies, and they mainly focus on oil and natural gas. And a lot of you may remember what happened, but in 2010, an offshore drilling rig exploded in the Gulf of Mexico and actually sank, causing millions of barrels of oil to be leaked into the ocean. And this caused massive amounts of damage to the marine life as well as the shoreline in the area, which British Petroleum received a lot of public backlash and loss of trust. So let's talk a little bit about how they responded to this. So they took responsibility and paid over $60 billion in fines and cleanup efforts. They were able to implement stricter safety protocols for drilling rigs, which was actually adapted industry-wide. They also worked to improve their risk management systems. And then when this happened, British Petroleum shifted their company's strategy and focus to more renewable energy sources, such as solar and wind. And they actually now have one of the largest solar farms in the world. And another thing they worked on doing was lowering their carbon emissions for the drilling rigs themselves, as well as their factories. So they rebranded with a stronger focus on sustainability, and they continue to work on that today. So let's talk a little bit about how this affects stuff today. So they're still facing a lot of criticism because here we are 16 years later, and the marine life in the Gulf is still not the same at all. And there's still a lot of species of animals, such as dolphins, who have never recovered from this oil spill. But they still remain a leader in the global industry, and they also work to rebuild their reputation through their renewable energy initiatives. So the reason we look at them is because they were able to make an ethical change out of this tragedy and start to come back from it.
All right, so to wrap everything up, here are the key takeaways from our analysis. First, looking at Volkswagen, we say how prioritizing short-term performance can actually push some companies into unethical decisions. When results matter more than integrity, it can lead to serious consequences, not just legally, but for trust and reputation. On the other hand, Patagonia gives us completely different examples. They do show us how purpose and driven leadership can actually align profit with environmental and social responsibilities. So doing the right thing doesn't mean sacrificing success. It can actually strengthen the brand long term. Then, when British Petroleum, we say how ethical failures can have major consequences, but also the companies do recover over time through accountability and meaningful change. It does highlight the mistakes don't have to define a company, but how they respond. So that definitely what counts. Overall, ethical leadership plays a huge role in shaping organizational culture and the long-term success. Today, businesses aren't just judged by profit anymore. They're judged by income on society as well. So to close this out, our final takeaway thoughts. Basically, companies today have a lot of power, not just in the market, but also they impact the planet and society as a whole. Because of that, leadership decisions really matter. So they determine whether a company's impact is harmful or sustainable in the long run. When we compare Patagonia, Volkswagen, and British Petroleum, it is really raises a bigger question about the future of businesses, and how companies should focus on profit or should they take responsibility for their own social environmental impact. So ultimately, the decision companies choose will shape not just their success, but the kind of world we do live in. Um, so our question to y'all is, in a world facing environment and ethical challenges, should company prioritize profits or responsibility to people and the planet? But thank y'all for watching and let us know what y'all think.